All right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It is Sunday, the 11th of December, and we're still in the full moon frequency, actually. We're in this frequency through today and some of tomorrow. So if you haven't done your releasing or your gratitude, you're kind of looking back, like as the sun illuminates the moon, in Gemini, it's a good time to journal and write. This is your time to look back at how far you've come. And I think that's what we're going to be doing for the next 30 days, because we will be entering a retrograde period, and that will give us a lot of fodder, a lot of access to information that we need in order to plan 2023. And that's a good idea to plan 2023, because you set your drishti. Like if you just let yourself go by the winds of change, there will be a lot of change. There's a lot of mutable energy. So 2023 will bring a lot of winds of change. So you get to know where you're going. And that's part of what gets illuminated over the next 30 days. So today, take time to do your release, your full moon release. Let that be a completion before we enter into a new moon coming up right around Christmas. So I'm so happy to have you. Oh, the Cayman Islands, right, Kim, right. Robin's here too. What are those dates in December? Okay, so let me just say quickly as announcements, and then we'll go into our Gene Key transmission. So I've been working on this year, I've been in a major pivot and working on a new platform, and that platform is called the Evolving Sisters Network. Evolving Sisters was always my company name, and I chose that many, many years ago. And one of my friends said, I always thought that it was a platform, a membership platform. And I never thought it was a membership platform, and it became a membership platform. And that gets to roll out on the 19th of December. And then on the 15th, we're doing a pre-applications for the leadership incubator inside of the Evolving Sisters Network. And I'm going to say more about this in the week that's coming, because we're leading up to this. And some of you haven't heard, some of you have heard a little bit because you've maybe been in my business mastery course. But we'll start to just really put context around it. And I'll say now that, and this really does segue with Gene Key 26, because Gene Key 26 is about our expression, our work in the world, and how we market it and how we sell it, believe it or not. And there's so many gems and so many nuggets. And of course, it's a very spiritual, as all of them are, a spiritual gene key. So my vision for the last 6 months, and I think prior to that, because I've been working with women so long and seeing what has been missing, what do we need in order to really flourish, especially as we go into 2026, the 2027, like a women's movement. Let's say the elevation from our shadow to our gift frequency. I mean, that's really we're poised to do that. And one of the things I know so deeply is that the more that we're giving our gifts and we're in alignment with the thing that we're here to bring and do through our particular embodiment, that's how things shift. And they shift quantumly, not just incrementally, because right now we need a quantum shift, do we not? If you look at the science data around our world, we need a quantum shift. So I believe women and women in their Dharma will be the frequency holders of this quantum shift. That's my stand. I don't care if I'm right or wrong, but I'll be right, because it's Gene Key 26 says that I'll be right because it's what I will invent. It's what I will create through that stand. So this is Gene Key 26 in action. And that is the Evolving Sisters Network, because what I believe is that if you have a structure to show up and shine your light, you'll do it. Not everyone wants to have their own personal coaching brand or business. Others want to use a structure or be inside of a container and structure. And that's what the Evolving Sisters Network is. So we'll have opportunities for leaders to get trained and show up inside of the Evolving Sisters Network, facilitating circles and also creating courses and master classes. Like, I don't need Tony Robbins, as I mentioned, or Pema Chodron. All of them are amazing. Brene Brown, they're beautiful. I need you. I want everyday sisters showing up, giving their gifts. Vanessa, I love that. I stand behind you, beside you, not behind me, beside me. Amen. Cameron, creating a space for building sacred community. Thank you, Cameron. Cameron's like ninja with words. I love that. So that's what's on my heart to do. And it was a big leap for me. It was a quantum leap for me. And Gene Key 26 talks about the ability to bend time, to bend circumstances. Really, it's bend light in order to manifest. And I think we've just started to tap into our abilities, and that is equal to how much shadow work we've done. And the Gene Keys are so cool for poising or positioning this concept to us. Like some of us were naturally guided to do shadow work, maybe long before it was popular. I know that a lot of the therapists I work with, they were all doing this kind of work, but they were doing that work for our own personal liberation. And the Gene Keys brought forward this concept that when we do our shadow work, we're doing it for our collective liberation. As we add more light frequency on the grid of this beautiful planet we're on, then we're poised to take some quantum leaps. So those announcements, thank you for asking, Myrna. Those announcements are going to roll out this week, and opportunities to come and play, opportunities to hear more about what is it. If you're in, well, you must be in this Facebook group because you're here now, but if you're listening on YouTube, inside of our Facebook group, I've put together a poll asking you, what are the things that you want to receive inside of this network? And so far we have our Razor's Edge community sharing, and that's definitely in the plans. And then we also have people wanting to do movement, and that's been on my heart as well, coming from the world of teaching yoga. We need to get into our bodies, and that helps us get out of our minds and being stuck. So those things are coming, and we'll hear more about them. Let's get into Gene Key 26. Now, if you have a birthday, you are in the frequency. If you have a birthday now, over the next few days, you are in the frequency of Gene Key 26, and that is the shadow of pride, the gift of artfulness, and the city, the divine expression of invisibility. This is not on its face. I think it's not on its face what it says. I think it's a lot more subtle than what it says. And it's carries within it some codes of play and fun. So think about it in that way as we create a listening here for Gene Key 26. Let's think of the trickster, that coyote energy. And that coyote energy is a shapeshifter. You can't nail down coyote. And it's coyote himself, herself, itself has this ability to shapeshift as a form of survival and also as a form of play. If you've ever watched coyotes in the wild and they don't know that you're watching, or they know you're watching and they've allowed you to watch, they play. They have a lot of fun together. And now you see them and now you don't. And that's where the city of invisibility comes into, this ability to merge with the whole. If you've ever needed to do that in your life, like I remember a friend of mine telling me that she was on a path and there were a bunch of loud people walking down the path in this kind of a lake area of surrounded by lots of nature. And they just didn't want to be bothered by anybody. They didn't want to talk to anyone. They didn't want to be bothered by anyone. Their energy was, the crowd's energy was a little bit rowdy. And so they just surrounded themselves with their invisibility cloak. Have you ever done that? And what happened was these people just passed them. They were literally sitting on the sides. My friends were literally sitting on the sides of the path. And these people just went right by them. Have you ever done that? Sometimes we can make ourselves infinitesimal, small, and sometimes we can become so big. Either way, it works. Like your energy is so big. I had another friend tell me, I was working for a company that did online dating. I'm not going to say who it is. Some of you know, but I was working for this company. And I did not really like the vibe of being inside of a corporate environment. I liked doing the job, but I liked doing the job from home. I didn't like doing the job from inside there. And my friend said, why don't you just become so big that no one notices you and you can do your own thing? Isn't that cool? So that's some of the abilities that we have inside Gene Key 26. Yeah, so Jessica says she's got the 2644 channel. That's good to presence because 26 is found in the ego heart center, that little triangle, which represents your will. And that is the heart of the shadow of 26. It's about, well, let me just say before we get into shadow, this is about the appropriate use of your will. And I love that because as spiritual people, we often want to discount our will because we see our will as the programming partner of this shadow is dominance. And we don't like dominance. We don't like to be dominated, and we don't like to dominate others. And that is one of the core shadows of humanity. And so much marketing and sales and business are run through this shadow, which is why we have that stereotype or the archetype of the used car salesman, right? The slimy, salesy part of life. And that is Gene Key 26's shadow. Yet there's an energy that 26 represents that has a lot of play in it and a lot of fun in it, but also a lot of use of will and as a stand. So if you've ever done anything like a business, like a venture, a project, even a relationship, right? You have to take a stand. You can't just go with the flow, which this is going with the flow, but it means I have a stand inside the flow. Isn't that paradoxical and cool? Because it means you matter. It means that you're co-creating. It means you're playing along. You're not just like a leaf getting battered around in the wind. That's aimless. Instead, you have that bow and arrow, that drishti on the target, and you're aiming for it. You're standing for something. And Gene Key 26 people are actually really artful in their way of communicating. You know, it's kind of that phrase, you can sell ice to an Eskimo, but you don't sell ice to an Eskimo unless you know they really need it. Because there's a consciousness. That's where the artfulness comes from. And I said this in the email, and I'm going to presence it again. I said that there was a time in my life when I didn't really like being in, on the planet. I didn't like playing this game, let's just say, because I was filled with a lot of suffering, and playing this game with a lot of suffering is miserable. And before that, I had practiced law. So that came from a paradigm of the shadow of Gene Key 26, which is called like eat what you kill. That's their revenue model, right? Eat what you kill. And it's a very like every person for himself or herself. That's the business model of it. Do you think that's the business model of nature? I don't think so. So we get to source other models for success, and nature is one of them. Nature is regenerative. Nature takes waste and it makes it food for some. Nature composts. Nature shares. Nature knows that if you're winning, I'm winning. There's no losers in nature. Because if there are losers in nature, then the ecosystem is going down. And that's where we are right now, because we've had that concept, that mind frame of eat what you kill. It's all about me. I get to take it all. Winner take all. How about that? Think about all these freaking memes that have been in our culture. That's Gene Key 26. That's the shadow. And so what's happened, especially with spiritual people, it's like, think about it as a pendulum. We've been on this pendulum so far over here, and we've seen what it's done to nature, our lives, our stress. We're freaking stressed out. Our bodies have taken the hit. We're broken down. We do not live in harmony in biorhythms. Like that's Gene Key 5 last week. Living in rhythms with nature. We don't do that because we're just work, work, work. 26 shadow cannot relax, because if it does, it starts to feel insecure. It has a deep fear. All shadow has a deep fear. So then spiritual people have gotten the memo on that, right? We used to be in the corporate world. We used to play that game. And then we woke up and we started to feel our hearts, which is really the essence of where this gift frequency goes, in artfulness, the opening of our heart. And then what I did was I left my will force. I just said, I don't need that. And I started to live really disempowered, honestly. And I remember a therapist telling me, there's two really wise phrases, and I'll get to the other one I was going to mention. But one therapist says, I want you to start to control things that you have control over. Because I had abdicated any sense of being in control. And now I kind of see it as this pendulum. Oftentimes we underdo and overdo in order to find that equipoise. Where is that sense? Oh yeah, where I'm really working the paradox. That truth is found in paradox. It's not that we shouldn't apply will. It's that when we over apply it and dominate, we create a world we don't even want to live in, and that our bodies are reacting to, and then we have to go on leave and fix. And so when I was in that state, my brain guy, actually, I found this incredible man, and he really reminds me of Gene Key 26. This wasn't his life work, but he reminds me of the teachings of 26. He's passed now. And he said, in order to be a no self, Kenlyn, you have to be a self. So I had kind of had this plan in my head where, okay, I'll just go from dominance, I'll go from pride of overexertion of my will as I had been trained, and I'll just go into like escape, spiritual bypass. Let's just get enlightened. I had no idea, right? What enlightenment, as we said, it's like flooded with light. And what do? But you see your shadow. So there's no escape. And we already know that. If you're listening, you already know that, because you've been on this path of going into your shadow, and you already know that the more light that's possible inside your DNA is because you've cleared it by seeing it, by bringing your shadow to the light. And when I say bringing your shadow to the light, I mean seeing the parts of you that has pride, being able to sit with it, being able to see inside yourself without judgment, because it is a part of the frequency band. And you do have to go from shadow to gift to city. You can't skip a step. You know, that's kind of in the trajectory of like the Ken Wilber worldviews, or my teacher, Larry Byram, who talks about worldviews in relationship. Everything is included and transcended. So you do get to walk the paces. You don't get to just pop over. That is a quantum leap. And for the most of us, we are walking the paces of our worldview, including and transcending. So there's no need to malign shadow. And there's no need to malign it in you. There's no need to hate yourself or bring shame, because that's just more shadow, and shadow can't clear shadow. The loving presence of your witness, your willingness to stand and stare at it and tell the truth. And honestly, my experience is I've come a long way from those disempowered places. My experience is laughing with it. And that's really the art form that Gene Key 26 brings to shadow. So it says, okay, so you've played a dominating game. You now know the consequences of power over. And Claire's here. Claire, I love that. Claire referenced a new leadership capacity, which is owning your own authority, not power over. That's what leadership means. Standing in your own authority. And that's what 26 is about. It's now we move into the frequency at the gift level of using our ego. I remember doing a retreat a couple years ago before COVID, and I said to people, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't have an ego, because there's a drive to personally create. There's a drive to personally affect, which is, to me, the definition of power. Personal power is to have influence, to affect the lives of. And we're living in a time right now where that's really on the menu. So it causes you to be more visible. It causes you to take a stand. It causes me to do these live streams. That is the appropriate use of ego. And then when we get into the city level, the divine expression level, that is where ego drops away on all 64 flavors. It's really, and what we mean by that is where individuality drops away. I think right now with like Chiron and Aries, we are in a time of individuality. We will go into a time of being more related to the collective. I remember when I was doing work with Free a Child, and this was an organization that I joined when I got back from India in 2001. And then I became the president and the acting director. And our work was to empower women in Nepal. And then we also did a project in Denver so that they were not trafficked into sex slavery. And I remember asking one of the women in our program in Nepal, in this small village, about her experience inside of our program. And it was really interesting. She could only answer the question in the we space. I'd be very curious to take this experiment back at, 20 years later. But at that point, she couldn't even answer how how our program, what she was doing, the street dramas, the micro lending, how that it was affecting her personally. She could only talk collectively, which you would think, oh, that's a higher expression. But actually, it's the same thing we're talking about. You have to go through the paces. You have to become an individual, a fully expressed individual, in order to have the higher frequencies of the collective. So I had to rewrite her testimonial for the modern Western mindset so that they could understand that she really was personally influenced and impacted in a positive way. To our minds, we couldn't like put our arms around what it's like in these Asian communities that really feel life through their families. And there's a lot of shadow in that as well. That hopefully, you know, they're getting their opportunity to become fully self-expressed individually. And the next iteration for us is to become community oriented. And that's why things like the Evolving Sisters Network are coming to light, because we can't survive if we're too individualistic. We cannot survive. We're not even happy. We live in these great big homes by ourselves, and we're not happy. So there's a movement to return to community, but to return to community with your gifts, with knowing who you are, so that, as like Carolyn Mace talked about in The Anatomy of Spirit, remember that? It was such an epic book about the chakras and our evolution. And she said, like, the tribal chakra is the first chakra. And in order to evolve, a lot of us had to leave it. We had to leave our families. We had to leave the community. That you think about that. Did you not do that? I'd like to see that in the comments. How many of you had to leave your community? I know I did. I had to leave my family of origin, and in a modern culture, that's totally acceptable. People go off to college, they go away, they move away, they find partners that were not in the clan, that represent a different mindset, and then they recreate that. So Carolyn Mace talked about first chakra, tribal. You had to leave it to evolve. That's what I'm talking about. And then now there's a coming back into the community. So you've heard my emails back in with my mother, right? Back into the conversation, but I'm coming back in as a sovereign woman. I'm coming back in clear of who I am. I'm coming back in with the ability to know that I matter, that I can take a stand, that I can direct my will force, and in directing my will force, I can cause and create quantum change. Yeah, so many people had to leave, right? This is absolutely part of the trajectory of awakening. And then we come into affiliations of like-minded people. So when I say in the homepage of the Evolving Sisters Network, it's evolvingsisters.com. Well, that site will be up soon this week. I say we are a group of enlightened, we're a community of awakened women. Because that means for me that there is some part of yourself that you've had to meet and bring to the table. And we're in a constant unfolding of that. And we're learning how to do that inside relationships, inside community, inside the greater whole. And just in the nick of time, right? As we look at the world, the planet, the state of things, there's never been a more urgent time There really hasn't. I mean, maybe there has been a lot of urgency as our ancestors have gone through their own trials and wars, famines, plagues. And here we're going through existential death. The idea of our own death, we're facing our own death, and the idea of the death of everything we love, the planet. So there really hasn't ever been this kind of urgency. And when I tune into that level of urgency and I read different authors, and everyone is, the ones that I'm reading, I will say, I love how we're bringing in, whether it's through astrology or through deep contemplation, through sustainability work, through spirituality, we're weaving a new tapestry. We're weaving a new narrative. We're becoming new people. And Gene Key 26 says that we can do it. And I'm going to end with this story of this movie that I saw, and I reference it often. So if you've been in my containers, you have probably heard this, but I think there's just no better Gene Key 26 movie. I mean, maybe someday instead of a playlist, we'll have like movies that correspond. Last time I talked about Interstellar, and today I'm going to talk about this independent art film called Exit Through the Gift Shop. It's about the graffiti artist Banksy, and how a documentary filmmaker went to make a movie about him. I believe that's how it goes. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen it. And then what he understood there was something he understood, and I'm kind of going to go outside the movie into his psychological his construct. And that was that he saw that he could do it too. So the filmmaker, the person who is witnessing the street artist, becomes a street artist, becomes an artist, and actually becomes a very famous artist for a minute, and then cracks under the pressure of it. But inside of that story is the story that we are inventing our reality. This is the province of 26. It's a maverick gene key. At the shadow level, inventing your reality is just sociopathology. And we saw that shit. We have seen a lot of that over the last several years. But at the gift level, it's really playing in a world that, I'm going to say it, is no thing. It's inventing something inside of no thing. There's a phrase that says life is empty and meaningless, and it's empty and meaningless that it's empty and meaningless. So if that phrase, life is empty and meaningless, hits you as a negative thing, that means that you are adding to it a concept of empty and meaningless. But if you pull back a little bit, you will see that there's no inherent meaning, no inherent anything. You get to create it. The Tao talks about the usefulness of things being the space. If there was no space, every single thing would be one thing. But there's infinite space. It's empty. And so we get to create inside of it. So your call to action today, as I wrap this up, is to embody your trickster. What would you do if you knew you could cosmically play? If you knew that the world was your blank canvas, who would you be inside of it? The thing that snagged the character in Exit Through the Gift Shop was that he found this fundamental principle. It's like he found the cosmic wormhole or the cosmic shortcut. And he was like, holy shit. Banksy is just Banksy because he declared himself as Banksy. I can declare myself as this, as whatever I want. If I stand in that, I can declare that. But he hadn't done any shadow work. So all of that material comes flooding through. That's why it's a tricky game, this enlightenment thing. I'll say more about that some other day, perhaps. It reminds me of a whole conversation I had with someone who was Osho's bodyguard. And we had this very conversation about enlightenment being very tricky business. So let's trust our path and let's trust how we've gotten here of like, yeah, working the paces isn't such a bad freaking thing because I'm prepared. I'm growing at the rate that I can handle. I'm growing at the rate that the light, that I'm not blown out by the light, that I can handle it. And so as you're growing at those rates and you become more and more visible and you see the part that ego wants to play in the shadow ego, and you witness it, love that, let it go, and keep playing, keep being the version of yourself that keeps coming to you. My prayer, my stand is that is how we will return ourselves to that flow with nature, with the planet, with the one, and restore our place as co-creators, as artists on the planet, instead of takers and dominators. We become artists. All right, that's what I got. Gene Key 26. So there's no razor's edge after this. We'll resume that in January as we open the door to the Evolving Sisters Network. That will be one of the benefits of those who are founding members inside the Evolving Sisters Network. And way more to come because we're going to harness your genius inside of the network to play so that you get to give your gifts. I'm going to read some of the comments here. Yeah, Myrna says, my family and I have superficial relationships and that's okay. Yeah, really accepting. And also we can ask them provocative or maybe just kind questions. How are you? What's on your heart? What's the thing you're most grateful for today? Maybe that's just enough of a coyote disruptor in our family dynamic that'll turn the whole thing on its head. All right, I'm just witnessing all the sisters who had to leave, had to make an imprint. Yeah, so Jessica says you're interested in learning because you've disliked selling and marketing. So interesting, right? And you have the Gene Key 26, you have the channel 2644. So yeah, you get to, it's really about reframing selling and marketing as coming from your heart. So there's a way that it creates intimacy. So if there was nothing to sell, I mean, Gene Key 26 people actually really love to package. I don't have this at all in my chart, but I love to package because really what I see it as is that it's a kindness. So it's it's the intersection, like those overlapping circles. It's the intersection between what's in me to create for you and what you want to have and consume and how you want to consume it. So to me, there's a ninja place where it's a co-creation, that what I have meets you in what you have. And then you feel super met. And you're like, oh my gosh, you totally see me in a way that perhaps I didn't see myself, or that I didn't give myself permission. So it becomes this beautiful mirror, selling, offering products, buying and selling, marketing becomes this beautiful relationship where it's intimate, where it's intimacy. I'm meeting you, you're meeting me. You're saying, I really love your creation. Thank you. And we assign a value to it, which in this world right now is just called money. But really, money is a stand-in for what? Our attention. I'm going to put my attention over here. So that's really Gene Key 26 in a higher octave, a higher vibration for business. Anybody else have anything to say? Suzanne has it in her SQ. Yeah, the SQ is where you tap into the core wound that taps into the collective. So yeah, that would be fun to explore that. Richard Rudd does different, like that's part of the Venus sequence. And so you can buy the Venus sequence, you can buy the activation sequence, and also the Pearl. And these 3 different sequences, he will teach you how to look at your hologenetic profile. So it's beautiful. Tuning into the intention behind the will. That's it, Cameron. I don't know if you read 26, but that's it. The intention behind your will. It's really harnessing the power of intention. When I was in India the first time, 2021, we came there and it was a pilgrimage, and I was probably the youngest one. And at that time had not started with Free a Child, but always was in some kind of volunteer. I did Habitat for Humanity as one of my, we did a building blitz and built 10 houses in 10 days. And I was always into volunteer work. I was always into being a do-gooder. And I laugh because that's shadow. There's beautiful light to that, and there's shadow to that. And I remember when I was in circle with the people who put together the India pilgrimage, they referenced that shadow, and they talked about that shadow and how sometimes we do things and they have unintended consequences that are negative, but our heart was pure. And they said that that's really all that is required, because we can't know. Now there is skill, right? We can now harness stories, and we can now look at examples and get educated. And at the end of the day, we might be wrong. And so we get to just stay with the intention of our heart, and we might be wrong. It's a safer game. It's a safer bet. All right. I love all of your comments. I love being here with you. I will see you next week. I'll be in Mexico, but we will be doing the Dharma Talk perhaps even earlier. So I will let you know if it's earlier through the Facebook group and through the emails. Just keep staying tuned. There's a lot coming forward, and yeah, I want you to be included. So sending you lots and lots of love today, lots of blessing, and may you turn on those light codes that are inherent in your DNA. A beach broadcast. I love that. Yeah. Well, it'll be a Caribbean broadcast, that's for sure. All right, sisters. Mwah.